Hello friends, welcome to the EduSite Network. Today we are going to talk about Harappan art, and for this discussion we have this in the studio, Dr. Seema Bawa, Professor, Department of History, University of Delhi. She has a teaching experience of 23 years and she has a PhD in History of Art, and books published by her include, I would like to tell you the titles: Religion and Art of the Chamba Valley, AD 700 to 1300, and Gods, Men and Women, Gender and Sexuality in Early Indian Art. So we are of course very privileged to have you here, ma'am, with us today, and we welcome you. And I would also like to again request you to begin the lecture.
Today we are going to talk about, in the series on beginnings of Indian art, Harappan art. Now Harappan art is, like the civilization itself, an enigma. We have so many questions regarding the nature of art that was being produced during this period, and also architecture, because we have this conception that Harappan civilization was extremely uniform and standardized, and that includes the production of art per se. Before we start, I would like to tell you two things. One is that Harappan art was not produced as art per se in its majority. Most of art that is being produced is utilitarian in character or is votive and ritualistic in character. So what we now call art is actually part of the material culture. They used this, for example, they're using pottery, which the designs on which are what we are now considering as an artistic production, or seals and ceilings and terracottas, toys, etc., which is what makes up the body of what we call Harappan art. And this is because in pre-industrial societies, generally art is not something that is made for the sake of the artist's pleasure. Okay, usually it is made as part of a larger project. It could be religious, it could be ritual, it could be utilitarian. Now that is why Harappan art is basically those pieces which are fine, these pieces of production. Okay, so that is what we will be considering in this particular topic. But the other thing that we need to keep in mind is that many of the things that were produced in Harappa continue to have some importance in art and culture throughout the centuries that follow. Now these whether these are because of a cultural continuity of the Harappan civilization into the post-Harappan civilization, and then its assimilation into Vedic cultures and the spread of civilization in other areas, is difficult to say. We can't actually trace a linear kind of a trajectory, but nevertheless many things that we see in Harappan art continue even into contemporary India or the Indian subcontinent, and this is a very interesting beginning, so to speak, the foundation of Indian cultural tradition. So first I like to show you, how and where Harappa civilization really develops. Now we can see that you have many civilizations developing at almost the same time in the 4th and the 3rd millennium BC all over the world. These are broadly called river valley civilizations or Bronze Age civilizations. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Harappan or Indus Valley civilization and China are some of the hot spots where these civilizations developed. We will not go into why they developed, but all of them are based on a broad presupposition that they contained monumental architecture and art, or fine production, creation of fine pieces, which could broadly be called art and craft. When Gordon Childe made his thesis, or he propounded his thesis on urbanization and the urban revolution, he gave about 10 characteristics as to what makes a civilization urban, and most of the civilizations that you can see on your screen are urban in character. So what is it that makes them urban? Concentration of surplus, production of surplus, script, literacy, trade networks, exchange networks, a bit of monetization, etc. But one of the very major things in this list is the existence of monumental architecture and the existence of abstract ideas about the divine or supernatural or the natural forces, whatever. And we see that in almost all these civilizations, you have the existence of these characteristics, and urban architecture, especially monumental architecture, and a standardization of monumental architecture is something that is seen in almost all urban areas of Harappa. Now, before also that a lot of sites of the Harappan civilization have been found. Not all of them are urban sites. Many of them are simple village or rural sites which are not very large in size, which do not have multi-storied buildings, but are using other elements which can be termed Harappan. These include the use of burnt and sun-dried bricks for architecture. Even if you are making one-story houses or smaller structures, they use this standard bricks. The use of pottery, usually the pottery is red with a black design painted on it. The designs are also quite specific to the civilization. Now, this is not to suggest that only one particular type of pottery was being used. There are many potteries and regional potteries also that exist before, in the early phase, in the mature phase, and in the later Harappan cultures. So you have the Hakra pottery, you have the Ravi type of pottery, so which we will be having a look as to see what it all entails. All right. Now, to give you an idea as to where we stand, in terms of cultures and civilizations in the world as well as in the Indian context, we will see that almost all of them are contemporary. Some start a little earlier and finish a little earlier, and some, like China, are almost contemporary to India. All right. So in India, what we see is that you have the Neolithic, then the PPNB, which is pre-pottery Neolithic, then you have pottery Neolithic, that is Neolithic with pottery, which you see at Mahargarh. All right, where at Mahargarh you will see the beginnings of food production. etc. And village settlements coming into being, round houses, then later square houses, the use of semi-permanent material to build these houses, and later you come to Harappan. Now Harappan is also pre-Harappan and Harappan era. So Hakra, Ravi pottery, Balakot, Kot Diji, Amri, all of things can be considered to be pre-Harappan, and then you have the early Harappan, the mature Harappan phase, which is broadly dated to about 2200 to 2200, 500,000, 2200, about that to about 1750, and then you have late Harappan, which then leads to the PGW. Right. Now, if you look at the spread of the Harappan civilization, interestingly, in the north, absolutely at the northernmost site is Manda in Jammu Kashmir, and in south you have maybe Roji, but if you consider Shotughai, which is an outpost in Afghanistan, then that's the westernmost, and you have Alamgirpur on the Yamuna in the east. So it's quite a large spread that you can see. You can see almost the entire Saurashtra, Kutch, Sindh, parts of Baluchistan, Cholistan, up to the Ganga. So the entire Indus, Ghaggar river, as well as parts of Rajasthan and Gujarat are being covered. Okay. There are a number of sites which are related to Harappa. Now we start with some of the early sites and go on to the architecture of some later sites. We start with Kot Diji. Now Kot Diji is an early site. You can see that it's a big mound that it has been built upon successively. On one side you can see how it was excavated, and then you can see early pottery at Kot Diji. Okay. Now Kot Diji is a site in Sindh in the southern Indus Valley, and it has a distinctive pottery style that is linked to a culture. Okay. A lot of sites show this, Amri, Kot Diji, all of these sites. Now Shoro these are showing similar pottery. Okay. Now the north of this you have Harappa, okay, because that's also on Ravi, and it also, the Harappa phase, which is a later phase, extends from Rahmandheri and to Sarai Khola. Okay, you can see on the northernmost, you can see Sarai Khola, then you can see Rahmandheri just underneath it, and on the east you can see Kalibanga, which is in north Rajasthan. Okay. Now again you will see that early Kot Diji pottery is showing signs of developing into Harappan pottery, because it has the red and black where the red with black paint on it, and it has some symbols that are quite Harappan in character, such as buffalo and solar and flower motifs. Of course, new motifs come in when we come to the mature Harappan phase. Now we come to two of the major sites of Harappan civilization. One is Mohenjo-Daro. Now Mohenjo-Daro was one of the, Harappa was the first site that was excavated, but Mohenjo-Daro was the first site that was extensively excavated and studied. You will see that Mohenjo-Daro is at 2 levels. It is built at 2 major levels. One is the citadel, which is at a height where you have all monumental architecture. The presence of monumental architecture is at the higher level. So things like the so-called granary, the great bath, all of these are at the higher level. At the lower level, we will see that you will have a more residential and industrial character. All right. Here you can see on the bottom, you can see the general view of the great bath. Now the great bath is again considered to be a ritual structure, something like, you have a rectangular, a large rectangular tank, and you have steps leading into this tank, in and around this tank. Around this tank you have rooms, probably for changing or for some other purpose. Obviously this is meant for community oblations or for community ablutions, that is for some kind of activity which involved a large number of people at the same time in the same place. It could be just a bath, it could also be offering water, it could be involved ritual dip as we see today. There are a number of theories as to why this bath could be constructed, because you have a well that feeds this bath, so it's not just a dry rectangular tank, it was meant to be filled with water. It is bitumen lined so that it doesn't leak. So that fact is that some activities that were taking place in Harappan civilization, at Mohenjo-Daro and other places continue in the Indian tradition in some form or the other till today. Even till today, you have in most Indic religions, that is religions that were formed in India, you have the fact that you have ritual ablutions. Before or after worship, you take a dip in a tank. Okay. Now I have another view of Mohenjo-Daro, which shows you the citadel with that so-called stoop at top, and you can see the entire view up to the great bath. And then you have the residential area where you have a slope that leads down to the lower town, and then you have kind in a loose grid. It's not as structured a grid as it was first thought to be, but in a grid you can see that houses, roads, etc. have been made. Again, what I would like to point out is that it's made of baked bricks. You can see the use of bricks all over. These bricks are standardized bricks all over a region. You see that the same proportion of bricks is being used, 3:2:1, or in other regions other proportion is being used, but that proportion then is uniform all over. Okay. Now here you can see that besides the Indus, also in the Ghaggar region, you have a large number of sites like Banwali, Kalibangan, and Farmana, but most importantly you have Rakhigadi. Now Rakhigadi is a newly excavated site that some people considered to be larger than even Mohenjo-Daro. On the other hand, if you can see just a little bit south, you can see Dhalavira. Dhalavira is another very extensive site that was excavated in the 90s. It's in the north of Kutch. It's in the Khadira island of Kutch, and that again is a site that compares to Mohenjo-Daro in size and complexity. Okay, just to give you an idea about the excavations of Dakigari, a large number of structures have been found and continue to be found at Dakigari, and especially important is the cemetery, where a large number of burials have been found in the typically Harappan manner, which is in an extended position. Most of them were buried in an extended position, and some grave goods were also found along with these burials. Now, grave goods, things that are buried along with the dead person, because there is a belief in many societies, ancient societies, that in the next life they would need these things. So, these grave goods give us a very good idea about the material life of the people. Whether it was in Mesopotamia, in the Ur cemetery, Sir Leonard Woolley found these graves with a number of grave goods, which told us, that elite, especially kings, their wives and their ministers, were getting buried in a more extensive manner, with richer and wealthier goods being buried along with them, things like gold beads and plates and armor, etc., depending on which class of people it was, and also gender differences in burial, that queens were being buried, but they probably did not have the same kind of status as you had for the kings. Similarly, you have the pyramids, which again suggest a lot of importance being given to death and afterlife, that is life after death, and a number of goods are being buried along with that. So, what we see is that grave goods help us not only see what death meant to a particular civilization, but also, very importantly, it helps us make out as to what was considered to be important in the life as they lived it, okay, important enough to be buried. All right. Now we come to Dhalavira. Now Dhalavira is an extraordinary site, because here you do not have the use of bricks, or bricks are used sparingly. What is being used is dressed stone, and an entire city is being made of dressed stone. It's at 3 levels. You have level 1, which is the citadel, then you have level 2, where you have some community activities such as a stadium as well as some residential area, and level 3, which is the residence, and which is a large site. It's almost 3 kilometers. All right, and as you can see, the other thing is the use of stone in architecture. So you have pillar bases being made of dressed and polished stone, which again is something that's not found in Harappa and Indus region. You see it in Kutch, you see a bit of it in Surkotada, in a newly excavated site Unikoran, and in Dhalavira, which is again in Kutch. But here you can see that you have a pillar base, all right, made of stone. It is round. If you can have the slide here. Okay. It's round, the base is round, and then it's like kind of right in the foreground you can see this particular piece. Again, I have another view of this, and you can see the columns also in the background, and also this English masonry kind of putting the stones and stone blocks over each other, right? And another view of how this was extensively used. Okay, I am showing you here that you have walls, quite high walls being made with this. Okay. Now these are small columns which in Dhalavira may have been used for they say for preventing egress and ingress, that is they had a rope or something tied to it, and they could control people from going up and down, or for harnessing certain animals. It's very difficult to say what the purpose of these two particular pillars were, but from the artistic point of view, if you were to look at these are tapered in character. There is a slight taper to them. They are dressed and polished. Now these are relatively difficult to achieve and show a very good level of craftsmanship and artistic skill in stone, right? This of course is in the passageway which goes up, and this interestingly is what is known as the shower, that you have a cistern from where water used to fall down into this basin kind of a thing underneath, and it's the local guides and the local excavators say that this was kind of a shower system, and you stood under it and took a bath. But whatever it was, it is one end of a pipe, like drain, which crisscrosses the citadel of Dhalavira. Water was a precious resource in a place like Kutch, so there is a large amount of craftsmanship that is devoted to creating water channels like these. So you have water, you can see a channel at one end, right? This is a well that was dug into just outside the citadel wall, and these are tanks. Large tanks were built on the water sources to rivers that used to flow, or streams that used to flow in Khadira, and these were dammed and channeled. So you have a series of 7 large reservoirs that are built around Dhalavira, and that is one of the most important achievements of this region, the preservation and water systems that existed in this place. But that was monumental architecture. Now we come to what is known as portable art, or art that could be carried, or small pieces of art. Now this is the very famous dancing girl made of bronze that was found from Mohenjo-Daro, right? Now almost everybody associates Harappan art with this particular piece. As you can see, she wears about 22 to 24 bangles on one hand. The other one has only 4. Okay, and she is standing. It's a small thin girl with her head tilted back, left leg bent at the knee. Her arm is bent with a clenched fist placed on the waist. The left arm rests on the thigh of the bent leg. And this has given rise to her identification as the dancing girl. As you can see, she is naked except for the ornaments on one hand. The hair is dressed in a loose bun. It's very difficult to say whether this particular posture is actually of a dancing girl, right? But for the want of any other appellation, people just named her as dancing because of the defiant pose that she is in. It's very, the pose itself is very provocative, or at least defiant, of a very young maiden who seems to be, kind of defying conventions. But nevertheless, the use of bracelets and bangles is something that we see in the material culture of Harappa, where these bangles were made of faience, they were made of shell, they were made of even baked terracotta. Terracotta was used as something to make bangles from, and this is attested from actual excavation and the finds that we've had from this region. All right. Now, amongst the very few sculptures that we have is this priest king made of sandstone. It's very interesting because you have this bearded figure with a sharp nose, half closed eyes, and a fillet, kind of a band on top. He's wearing a kind of a uttariya or a cloak kind of a thing over one shoulder, which has a trefoil design, right? And also an arm band, which may or may not be an amulet. So what he represents is very difficult to say, but people, excavators and archaeologists and later historians have tried to say that just his bearing and the kind of effort that went into making this particular piece suggests that he had some importance in society. Now, this could have been because of his position either as a priest or as a king, or a king who was also a priest, because we do not know about the precise political and social structure of Harappa. The script has not been deciphered even today. Therefore, it's only speculation as to who this person was, but he was important enough to be sculpted, right? A lot of sculptures have not been found that could be like this particular sculpture. On the other side, you can see that you have the famous here on the seal, you have a humped bull with a number of under his neck. You can see the folds. Also, you can see the script, which has not been deciphered. Typically on each of the seals, you have 4 to 5 characters that have been inscribed. Underneath is a ceiling. All right. Now we have a very important part of Harappan art are seals. Seals are things that we used to inscribe upon, say, something, a bale of cotton or something, to give it an identity. Whether each seal or a set of seals represented a city is very difficult to say, but what you have is that you have representations. For example, on this particular piece, you can see here, you can see that you have a seated figure in so-called yogic posture, that is seated cross-legged on a seat underneath, which you can see you have animals, and around it you have buffaloes, rhinoceros, elephant, tiger, and a series of characters on top in Harappan script. Now, Marshall had said that this is ichthyphallic, but that is very difficult, and tricephalous, that is 3 heads and ichthyphallic, but you can't really make out. It may be or just some design on the cloth, or it may be ichthyphallic, but nevertheless this figure is being surrounded by animals, is wearing a horned crown, and later these are characteristics that are associated with Shiva as Pashupati, the master of the beasts. There have been alternate interpretations of this particular seal and set of seals, and there are other seals that look like this. with 7 animals, 10 animals, more animals also and less also. But this seal has been interpreted by Shumangana Atre as the Lady of the Bees. She says that, the entire Harappan religious ethos seems to be more aligned towards female worship, and it's likely that this is a female. Another Sansone sculpture has been found from Mohenjo-Daro, and this is very finely done. It's very controversial because you also have from the Mauryan period in Lohanipur a similar torso. So its dating to the Harappan period has been questioned by many people, right? But it's also considered to be a prototype of the later Jinnah figures in Jain iconography, right? Now we come to the Terracotta tradition. Now the largest number of artifacts that have been found from Harappa, pre-Harappa to late Harappan range, are made of terracotta. Terracotta is baked clay, right? In the Harappan period, most of these figures are hand modeled with applique designs on them, right? Mahargarh, as you know, is Neolithic, mainly Neolithic, and goes up to pre-Harappan period, and even during this period a number of figurines were being made. These were mainly of females. Here you can see that you have women being or females being sculpted in various ways. Sometimes you don't have a head, but only the pectoral region. You have only the pectoral region and the lower body, which is being emphasized. Sometimes they're shown with plants or with children, but the hair is usually sculpted with just lines of threads, thread-like clay. Sometimes, but not always, there is also some kind of a rhythmic design over this, like some kind of a flower arrangement or some other arrangement. This is also known as a winged nimbus, right? The other important thing that you can notice in these series is the hollow large bulbous eyes. These may have been just incised into the faces. There's not a lot of facial structure otherwise that can be seen, all right? But by the time we come to the later Harappan period or the mature Harappan period, you have a number of features also developing in the face. Here you can see that you have appliqued eyes, lips, ornaments of various kinds, necklaces, waistbands, etc., that are added to these figurines, right? Now these figurines are like the one in the bottom, in the middle, you can see is associated with a number of vegetational elements and has been identified with the earth goddess, right? Again, there are a number of female figurines. Some of them are not the slim type, some of them are the round type, as you can see at the top, and may show pregnant women. You also can see that women are shown with children. Here she seems to be bathing the child in a tub, all right, or grinding stone. Here, within a particular aperture, she is shown as grinding grain with a quern. Also from Nowsharo, a similar sculpture with less facial features can be seen, but nevertheless a division of labor is discerned through these terracottas, that women were in charge of processing food through grinding, etc. That increases the caloric value of food and its digestibility. There are also other terracotta figurines from this period, right? These particular figurines with that headdress, which may or may not have plants coming out, are very important in reconstructing Harappan religion. Okay. Besides purely female figures, you also have composite figures. So birds and humans are combined, or animals and humans are combined here. Now we come to a large variety of animal terracottas. You have dogs, you have multiple headed beasts, you have rhinoceroses, you have squirrels and rabbits, and you have carts also. As a toy cart which is being pulled by bullocks is interesting, and you have many of these. They actually have dowels in the wheels so that they can be pulled with a string. So they must have been meant as toys probably. Here you can see a better version of the same. A driver is shown sitting on the cart, who is propelling this particular device, and then you can pull it also. This also gives us an idea about how and what kind of transport was being used in the Harappan period, right? Furthermore, you can see a toy cart with two wheels from Mohenjo-Daro, and a bird toy also from Mohenjo-Daro, in which you have a dowel arrangement which puts the wheels to work. Other kind of elements can also be seen in the art of terracotta during the Harappan period. This is a chrome colored bird with paint on it from Mohenjo-Daro. Then you have a man holding a duck from Harappa and a bird in a cage. So they were also keeping birds either for dietary reasons or just as pets. Masks is another category that you see. Whether these masks were from ritual purposes or votive purposes or just toy masks is difficult to say, but nevertheless this is a category of terracottas which is quite interesting. And in one of these you can see that there are holes. These holes were probably meant to put string and tie the mask. Okay. Monkeys, climbing from Mohenjo-Daro, a monkey holding a baby, and other games such as a maze and a dice. You can see here a maze with a little ball that went round and round, or a maze through which you could probably, like you have even today, right? Besides this, you have seals that are made of faience and of terracotta. Faience is basically ground stone that is then put in a mixture and then fired, right? Then you have a terracotta horse from Luthal, Whether it's actually horse or ass or a wild ass is very difficult to say, but this is very important find because there is an entire controversy regarding the existence of horses in the Harappan period, and it is said that horses were brought in by Aryans, so-called Aryans, when they came from Central Asia into northwestern India and destroyed the Harappan civilization. The other one is Kalibangan, where you have a series of fire altars in which burnt grain has been found. Right? Now we come to pottery. Now pottery has been a characteristic feature of Harappan civilization right from its inception, and this is Ravi pottery that was hand built, and it also contains the fish scale motif, which becomes characteristic of mature Harappan phase. Pottery is very localized also, or regionalized, and here from Loralai in Balochistan, you can see that it uses many colors, right? Colors are even used in terracotta figurines, and many of them are painted. So sometimes you have painted hair, eyes, and yellow color is used to maybe depict gold ornaments, right? Often you have graffiti or marks on these pots to distinguish which kind of potter or which potter's workshop was used, right? More seals here. You can see that this is so-called unicorn seal on one side. Then you have the rhinoceros, elephant, bull, and this is the one on top is very interesting because you have a man fending off two tigers. Lapidary is also an important element of Harappan art. Lapidary means beads, the making of beads, especially carnelian and faience beads, also made of steatite. Steatite is kind of a paste that is fired. Then you have the use of, you can see these beads that are large beads, but you also have very, very fine beads that are very, very small. And we also have found from Mohenjo-Daro and other places workshops in which these beads were made, and bead making equipment, needles that were used to make holes in the beads so that they could be threaded through. These are extremely small, they can make holes of less than a millimeter, right? Other decorations that we've talked about in the beginning, as you could have seen on the dancing girl, are bangles, ornaments such as shell bangles, bangles made out of shell and out of terracotta, right? You can see here. So that is.
All right, ma'am. Thank you so much for this presentation. And with that, I would like to ask you, say, for a general viewer, for somebody who is not a student of history, could you delineate, say, few characteristics of Harappan art, say, for them to be able to identify and say, okay, this could belong to the Harappan period?
Great. Now, Harappan art basically it's can be identified. Usually it's identified as Harappan because of the layer in which it's been found during excavations. But also, one important element of terracottas is the quality of its baking, and the quality in the red color that is being used they are usually red in color, and secondly the form of the figure. Okay, the early terracottas do not have facial features. The later terracottas have apple-like eyes and ornaments which are in a curved design. All right, so that is one element that helps us identify something as belonging to the mature Harappan phase, because you can have a lot of figurines, but you also need to distinguish as to which phase do these figurines belong to. These are not very large in size. They are usually from say 3 to 4 centimeters. They're not very large. The terracotta toys can be very small in size, 2 centimeters at the most. Most of them are 2 to 3 centimeters. The figurines may be a little larger. They can, they're about, you can have them about this big. Their purpose of these figurines originally was considered to be worship, that these were used for worship. But the context, that is when you excavate something, where are they found? Are they found in shrines? But we see that they are not in shrines. They are found in general context. So maybe they were votive, that is they were offered as a votive offering or something like that. So there was not necessarily worship of these. So all of these figures cannot be called mother goddesses. Some may have had a fertility function, but all of these could not have been, the kind of numbers that we find and places where we find them. They could all not be considered to be mother goddesses. Some, if you notice, are more elaborately delineated, have been made more elaborately, they have more ornamentation, and also they are associated with plants, with water pots, etc., which gives them additional significance. But there are some figurines of women that are with children, so they may be just mothers, not necessarily mother goddesses. There are women who are shown as doing household activities. Again, these may be some figures that were made either as a votive offering, or these may just be part of a larger creative tradition that was devoted to depicting the daily life, or was considered was more in touch or more concerned with, I would say, more concerned with the material life around them. So they were making things like toys for the children. They were making little animal toys, or were just depicting any kind of daily life. You have dice being made, you have weights being made, which is standardized, which again show a great concern with the material life of people.
Right, ma'am, as you said that these terracotta figures, they were not just made for say religious purpose. They were not necessarily goddesses if those figures are women. But were there any ornaments also made from terracotta?
Oh yes, ornaments were made from terracotta. We do see that you have beads of terracotta that were being used, were strung together and worn probably. Then you have terracotta bangles, and bracelets being made. So there's an effort to make a lot of jewelry with terracotta.
So can we say that was of course the origin of terracotta, and then the terracotta we have now has been learned from that?
Probably, you have the use of clay and clay figurines before, but these are not necessarily ceramic. That's not fired. They get fired in the later Neolithic period, and the largest and a sophistication of firing techniques comes in the Bronze Age.
All right.
And terracottas really, as such, have their origins. I would say terracotta art has its origins in this period.
All right, ma'am. Thank you for answering all my questions, and of course, as we are reaching the end of the lecture, we will not be able to have more of a question answer session in that, but with this I'd like to thank you, ma'am, for being here and for sparing your valuable time and also talking to us about Harappan art. And thank you viewers for watching. Have a nice day.